It began in an airport lounge. Ordinary faces, busy travelers, the hum of announcements filling the air. Among them, a woman, her name Amina, quietly reading, minding her own. But behind the scene, an unspoken tension was about to take root. Nearby, a family arrived, parents and a son. At first glance, nothing unusual, just another family, waiting for their journey to begin. Yet, in the fleeting glances they exchanged, in the subtle shifts of their posture, something else stirred. As boarding was called, the woman and the family found themselves drawn closer not by choice, but by circumstance. No words were exchanged, yet their silence spoke volumes. What happened next would challenge assumptions, shatter illusions, and uncover truths too often ignored. This is that story. And it begins with a single moment of choice, a reaction, an unfolding that no one in that lounge could have foreseen. Amina Johnson, a name well known in legal circles, a civil rights attorney whose work has touched lives across the country. Her dedication is unshakable, her belief in justice resolute. Today she isn't in court, but on her way to a diversity summit, a gathering of minds dedicated to fostering inclusion and equity. For Amina, this flight was meant to be a brief pause, a moment of reflection amidst her tireless advocacy. She often thinks about progress, about how far society has come and how far it still has to go. Her own life has been a testament to both triumph and the harsh realities of prejudice. She's fought battles in courtrooms, faced the unspoken doubts of colleagues, and endured the quiet, cutting judgment of strangers. Yet she remains hopeful, grounded in the belief that change is possible, even if painfully slow. Across the lounge, the Smith family prepares to board. John Smith, a man who commands respect in boardrooms, a corporate executive whose words can sway decisions and futures. But beneath the polished exterior lies a worldview shaped by privilege and assumptions, biases he rarely questions. Linda Smith, his wife, embodies grace and politeness, always careful to maintain appearances. Yet her civility often masks the implicit biases she's carried since childhood, biases that shape her interactions in subtle, unexamined ways. And then there's Ethan, their teenage son. He's at an age where ideals begin to form, where the world starts to feel larger, more complex. Torn between the values he's been raised with and the inklings of a broader, more inclusive perspective, Ethan often finds himself silent, observing, questioning but rarely speaking up. Together, they appear to be an ordinary family. Yet beneath the surface, their unity is fragile, their values conflicting. And this flight would bring all of it to light. The boarding call echoes through the terminal. Travelers gather their belongings, the rhythm of the airport shifting toward departure. Amina boards with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to travel. She takes her seat by the window, placing her book on the tray table. Moments later, the Smith family steps into the aisle. Their assigned seats place them next to Amina, a proximity neither party had chosen. John's expression tightens almost imperceptibly as his eyes flicker toward her. Linda hesitates before sitting, her movements stiff and measured. Ethan lingers for a moment, glancing at Amina before taking his seat beside his mother. The atmosphere is subtle but unmistakable, a discomfort that speaks louder than words. Amina senses it, the way she has sensed it so many times before. For now, she remains silent, focusing her gaze out the window as the plane begins to fill. Behind the scene, decisions are forming, perceptions solidifying. And soon, this fragile moment of silence will shatter in ways no one could have imagined. As the plane begins to taxi, the unease grows. John Smith glances toward Amina, his expression tightening. Then, with a tone that carries just enough volume to be heard by those around him, he calls for a flight attendant. "Is there any chance we could rearrange this seating? It's not quite what we expected." The words hang in the air, subtle yet cutting. The flight attendant, momentarily taken aback, responds professionally, explaining that the flight is nearly full. Linda shifts in her seat, her eyes focused anywhere but on Amina. She adjusts her handbag, her movements calculated, almost performative. Ethan sits quietly, his gaze flickering between Amina and his parents, a faint discomfort evident in his posture. Amina says nothing. She's seen this before, the quiet ways in which people express their disapproval, their discomfort. She picks up her book, her calm demeanor masking the frustration that simmers beneath the surface. Minutes pass. Amina glances up from her book, turning to Linda with a warm, polite smile. "It's a beautiful day to fly, isn't it?" she offers. Linda nods stiffly, her response clipped. "Yes, I suppose so." John, seated on the aisle, leans toward his wife, his voice low but unmistakable. "Let's just get through this." The exchange is quiet, yet those seated nearby begin to notice. Passengers exchange glances, some whispering to one another. The tension, once confined to a single row, now starts to ripple outward. Amina remains composed. Years of navigating similar situations have taught her the power of restraint. She resumes reading, though her focus is fractured. The murmurs grow louder when John raises his hand again, summoning the flight attendant. "Look," he says, his voice firm. "This really isn't working for us. Is there nowhere else we can move?" The attendant, now visibly uncomfortable, reiterates that the seating cannot be changed. Passengers nearby begin to watch more closely, some shifting uncomfortably in their own seats. Then, Linda speaks up. "I'm sorry," she says, her tone carrying a practiced civility. "It's just that we'd prefer to sit as a family." Perhaps there's a solution. Amina finally looks up. Her expression remains neutral, but her eyes meet Linda's directly. The moment lingers, silent yet charged. The flight attendant, clearly under pressure, tries to de-escalate. "I understand, ma'am, but we're unable to make changes at this time. Everyone has been assigned their seats." John exhales sharply, his frustration evident. Linda looks away, avoiding Amina's gaze entirely. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man leans toward his wife, whispering, "Did you hear that? Unbelievable." The atmosphere in the cabin grows heavier, the tension no longer confined to a single row. It's now a shared unease, spreading among the passengers like a ripple on still water. And for Amina, this is a moment she's experienced too many times before, a collision of silence, judgment, and the quiet indignities that so often accompany them. But what none of them know is that this moment, already fraught, is only the beginning. As the murmurs in the cabin grow louder, Amina finally closes her book and looks directly at John. Her voice is calm, steady, deceptively gentle in its precision. "Excuse me," she begins, addressing both John and Linda. "I couldn't help but notice your discomfort. Is there something about me specifically that's making you feel this way?" Her tone is measured, devoid of anger. Yet her words carry weight. The nearby passengers fall silent, their attention drawn to the unfolding exchange. John shifts in his seat, momentarily caught off guard. Linda avoids Amina's gaze entirely, her fingers gripping the strap of her handbag. I didn't say that," John stammers. "It's just we'd prefer a little more space, that's all." "Space?" Amina repeats, her voice soft but firm. "I see." She pauses for a moment, letting the silence linger. "You know, it's interesting how space often seems to mean people like me need to move." Across the aisle, a man in a uniform jacket, a black off-duty pilot, leans forward. His voice breaks the tension. "She's right," he says, his tone even but resolute. "I've seen this too many times." The flight attendant, who has remained nearby, nods slightly, her earlier discomfort replaced by quiet agreement. More passengers murmur, some voicing support for Amina. The dynamic in the cabin begins to shift. The tension in the present moment gives way to brief glimpses of the past. We see a younger John Smith, seated at his father's knee. The elder Smith speaks with authority, his words laced with the biases of another era. "Stick to your kind, John. That's the way the world works." Linda, as a young girl, watches her mother hastily cross the street to avoid walking near a black family. Some things, her mother says with a tight smile, are just better left separate. And then Ethan, alone in his room, scrolling through social media. He pauses on a video of a peaceful protest, his expression conflicted. The comment section is a battleground, and for the first time he begins to question the beliefs he's inherited. Back in the present, the silence stretches, uncomfortable yet electric. And then, unexpectedly, it's Ethan who speaks. I think you're right," he says, his voice hesitant but growing stronger with each word. His parents turn to him in shock. "Ethan," Linda begins, her voice sharp, but he doesn't stop. "No, Mom," he says, his tone firming. "This isn't right. We've been treating her like she doesn't belong, and that's not okay." The words land heavily, reverberating through the cabin. John stares at his son, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. Linda looks stricken, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Amina meets Ethan's gaze, her expression softening. For the first time since the flight began, there's a glimmer of connection, a shared understanding. The plane hums along, the tension still lingering in the air, when without warning, the turbulence begins. It's sudden, violent, as the aircraft shakes, causing a ripple of panic among the passengers. The seatbelt sign blinks on, the overhead compartments rattle. A wave of unease sweeps through the cabin as the plane drops momentarily, then jerks upward with force. And then, just as quickly, the atmosphere shifts from discomfort to chaos. Linda Smith, who had been gripping her seat tightly, suddenly gasps, clutching at her chest. Her face pales. "Linda," John calls, his voice rising with alarm. "Linda, are you okay?" But Linda doesn't respond. Her breathing becomes shallow, erratic. She grips the armrest, her eyes wide with panic. A wave of nausea hits her, and she collapses against John, her body going limp. For a moment, it seems as though the room is frozen in place. Passengers glance nervously at each other. A few try to help, but it's clear that the situation requires more than casual assistance. And in that moment, Amina's training takes over. Without hesitation, Amina rises from her seat, her calm demeanor cutting through the panic. She moves swiftly to Linda's side, her hand resting gently but firmly on the older woman's shoulder. "I'm a trained medical professional," Amina says, her voice commanding attention. "I can help." John, still in shock, stares at Amina, his earlier reluctance now replaced by a desperate need for assistance. "Please," he pleads, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "She's not breathing properly, do something." Amina nods, her focus sharp. She calmly checks Linda's vitals, her hands steady. "She's in distress. I need to help her breathe properly. Everyone, please stay calm." There's no time for hesitation. Amina positions Linda in a recovery position, massaging her chest to ease the constriction, speaking softly but firmly as she works. The minutes seem to stretch, as every second counts. The turbulence continues, but Amina's actions are methodical, precise. After what feels like an eternity, Linda gasps, her breath returning in shallow, ragged bursts. Slowly, she regains consciousness, her eyes fluttering open as Amina continues to monitor her. From the seats around them, passengers begin to speak up. One by one, people express their gratitude, their admiration for Amina's composure and expertise. "That was incredible," says the black off-duty pilot who had spoken earlier. "I knew you'd know what to do." Amina offers him a quick, appreciative glance, but she remains focused on Linda. Other passengers, those who had been silently observing the tension between Amina and the Smith family, are now visibly shaken by the unfolding scene. One woman, an older Latina passenger, leans forward from her seat. "Thank you," she says quietly. "You saved her life." The reality of the situation begins to hit the Smith family. They watch in stunned silence as Amina works tirelessly to stabilize Linda. John, his face now pale with a mix of relief and guilt, slowly grasps the gravity of what has just happened. It's not just Linda's life Amina has saved, it's their perception of her, their assumptions, their prejudices. The contrast is stark, undeniable. Amina, the woman they had dismissed, had proven to be their lifeline. As Linda stabilizes, her breathing returning to normal, Amina gently pats her shoulder. "She'll be fine now. Just keep her calm and let the flight attendants take over." But the moment of gratitude feels hollow. The Smiths are forced to confront their earlier behavior, their ignorance, and the distance they had tried to create only for it to be obliterated in the face of Amina's compassion and professionalism. As the plane steadies, the calm that follows feels almost surreal. The once tense atmosphere now replaced by the soft hum of the cabin, the weight of what's transpired hanging heavily in the air. The turbulence is past, but the storm inside the Smith family is only just beginning. Ethan, who had been quiet throughout the ordeal, now stands, his gaze fixed on Amina. There's no anger in his voice, only a genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," he says, his words carrying the sincerity of someone just beginning to see the world differently. I didn't understand before. I'm really sorry for how we treated you." Amina looks at him, her expression softening, but her gaze unwavering. "Thank you," she replies simply, her tone carrying the weight of years of experience in moments like this. "But it's not just about me, it's about all of us learning and unlearning the things we've been taught." John and Linda remain silent for a long moment, their faces unreadable. The guilt is evident in their eyes, but they hesitate, reluctant to admit their role in the tensions that had unfolded. Still, it's clear that the experience has left a mark on them. Something has shifted, if only slightly. John finally speaks, his voice quieter, less certain than before. "We didn't mean for it to happen like this," he mutters, almost to himself. Linda, her expression still one of discomfort, turns to Amina. I don't know what to say," she admits. "But we're grateful. You saved her life." Amina offers a simple nod, but her eyes are already distant. The weight of the moment lingers, not in anger, but in quiet reflection. Amina gazes out of the window once more, her thoughts turning inward. She reflects on the journey, not just the one that brought her here today, but the larger, more personal journey she's been on her entire life. The truth is, moments like this aren't rare for her. They come in many forms: small, silent judgments, assumptions, and biases that build up over time. But today was different. This moment had shaken the foundations of something much larger than just one plane ride. Back at her home, she writes an op-ed reflection on what happened, on the uncomfortable truths that surfaced, and on the lessons that must be learned. She pens words not just for herself, but but for others who might read and understand the depth of what transpired. We don't always see our biases, she writes. They live in the quiet spaces, in the unspoken moments, in the places we never dare to look. And only when we confront them, when we allow ourselves to feel uncomfortable, can we begin to change. The piece goes viral. It ignites a firestorm of conversations, both online and offline, about racism in public spaces, about how people of color are treated by society in even the most ordinary moments. It sparks debates, discussions, and reflections. Amina's words resonate, and the impact of that flight ripples far beyond the confines of the cabin. People begin to talk not just about the story of one flight, but about the deeper, systemic issues that persist in the world around them. Her reflection takes her back to the beginning, back to a childhood spent navigating the quiet, insidious racism that lingered even in her own family. She remembers being told she had to be twice as good to be seen as equal. The weight of those words shaped her, but they also fueled her drive to change the world, piece by piece. Amina recalls the first time she stood in court, challenging the biases of a system that had long been stacked against people like her. The first time she used her voice, not just for herself, but for others who couldn't speak. She'd spent years fighting a system that was designed to keep people like her out. But with every case, every conversation, she grew more resolute. And now, sitting on this plane, Amina knows that the fight is far from over. But today, for the first time in a long while, she feels like a small victory has been won, not just for herself, but for those who will come after her. Those who will push against the quiet walls of prejudice, even when it feels like no one is listening. As the plane descends toward its destination, the weight of the journey is far from over for the Smith family, for Amina, and for all who bear the scars of systemic racism. What began as a moment of tension has blossomed into a profound lesson, not just for those involved, but for all of us who watch from the outside. But the question remains, what would you do if faced with such a situation? Racism thrives in silence, in the moments when we stay quiet, when we look away, or when we remain complicit in the systems that perpetuate it. But every voice matters. Every action counts. Every time we speak up, take a stand, and demand change, we make a difference. As you reflect on this story, I encourage you to consider your own role in confronting racism in your own life, in your own community. We all have a part to play. If this video moved you, share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's not let these issues be swept under the rug. And I want to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share your own experiences, your reflections on what you've seen here today. Together, we can challenge the narratives that divide us and build the world we know is possible. If you want to learn more about how you can get involved in fighting racial injustice, I provided links to organizations that are working on the front lines every day. Your support can make a tangible difference. Together, we can break down the walls that separate us. Let's keep fighting for justice, for equality, and for a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.